through some of these reasons that we saw in our surveys that teens have, or the teens and young adults have walked away from the faith in college and in later years. And we were looking at this reason, this idea that this reason number two, the teens and 20-somethings experience of Christianity has been shallow. That's not the word I chose. It's not the word I would have used probably. It's the word that was sort of used to sum up some of the results, a category of results that had to do with their experience at church. And that many who walked away reported that their experience of church was one of the main reasons that they left. So you had comments like, church is boring, 31%. A quarter said faith is not relevant to my career or interests. 23% the Bible's not taught clearly or often enough. 20% God seems missing from my experience at church. So it's actually several different reasons sort of grouped under this one heading, but maybe the thing that they have in common is the experience of church that they're having has not compelled them to consider it important and to stay and to find their place either in church where they grew up or another church. It's not encouraged them to find that place and to find their way to life with the church. And so I want to talk about how we respond to that a little bit. And I said a couple of things. One of them didn't get a whole lot of traction, so I'm going to say it again. Philippians chapter 1. Everybody maybe turn to Philippians 1 as we start here. Somebody read Philippians 1, 9 through 11 for us.
This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God.
So Paul starts here in this section in Philippians 1 by praying for them to have love so that they can have then knowledge and depth of insight, and so that they can then discern what's best and be pure and blameless when Christ comes. It's one of these classic Pauline kind of, I want this to happen so that this will happen, so that this will happen. You see that in a lot of his letters. He's fond of these sort of chains, connecting these concepts together. And this is one of those places. But maybe where I would start with, well, knowledge and depth of insight, Paul begins with love. And I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul talks about, if you have all these things, including knowledge, but don't have love, of what good is it? I think sometimes we think of depth as this sort of deep intellectual engagement. And maybe that's where we go wrong. Because I don't think that's the way Paul sees depth in the church. I think Paul would begin with, we've got to love one another. We've got to show love. And I don't mean this cheap sort of easy, I feel really good about you, kumbaya kind of love. I mean the kind of love that makes him say several times in his letters, bear with one another, right? I mean, that's actually, I like that about Paul, that he often says, bear with each other. Because I know some of you bear with me. And believe it or not, I bear with some of you sometimes. But that's the way it ought to be. That's what has to happen in a community of faith. We commit to loving each other. We commit to this experience where in love for each other, we start to discern what God wants and what he's looking for and how to go about being his people. But we don't do that by beginning with that place of love for one another. I think that's relevant because I wonder if maybe maybe we've created a climate where people don't know how to bear with each other and love each other. We have not exactly, in churches of Christ at least, been people who have prized peace in in recent generations. Maybe that's coming home to roost a little bit. We certainly live in a world in which bearing with isn't something we're good at. And I wonder if that has not leaked over into the way we do church. Because what strikes me often about some of these things as these young adults report, here's why I'm leaving. I'm not seeing much engagement. I'm not seeing much. Well, I tried to talk to somebody about this, and here's what happened. It seems to be the default has been, let's just go. Let's just leave. And I think that's a problem. And let me be real clear. I'm not blaming teenagers and young adults for that. I'm blaming us for not creating the kind of community where that can happen. Where they know that's a possibility. That's something we can do. That more important than your opinion about this matter or my opinion about this matter is the love that we have for each other in Jesus Christ, and the ways God will use us and work with us in that love. And I think when we lose track of that, what we create is a community where there is no possibility to do. And I'm not saying we've done that here or that there's not a possibility to be different. I'm just saying, I certainly look around and I don't see a lot of signs in our world that people know how to love and bear with each other. And sometimes I don't see a lot of signs in the church at large about that either. What do you think?
People have to do it every day.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
People have to do it every day, and it's frustrating. Unless they're absolute dictators somewhere, they have to do it every day with some people. So people use as a way to vent their frustrations and having to do it. But it's a fact of life. They have to get along with their coworkers, our family members, and all kinds of things.
So Matt says it's fact of life. We have to get along with people at work and at family. We have to work out our differences, and that we use social media sort of to vent our frustration and our anger sometimes. Other thoughts?
I mean, you say that it's not fair to blame these people for walking away and instead of blame us. I think there's blame to be had on both sides. And I think that's the essence of bearing with one another, is recognizing that there's going to be faults and things to blame on both sides all the time, because we're imperfect.
That's correct. That's certainly correct. Yeah.
Once we realize that, the bearing with becomes a lot easier. We're not expecting perfection of ourselves, and we're not expecting perfection out of the other people either.
Oh, but with respect, Matt, it's not quite that. I mean, that sort of ignores the problem, because in a workplace, okay, you have to bear with one another because everybody wants the job and everyone wants to stay there. And so because everyone wants to stay employed, you have to make those compromises and the like. But the whole point of the problem here is there's always a solution. You leave. You quit the job. You leave the church. And so you don't have to do it. And that's what people are doing. They're saying, I'm not going to do it because I feel like I'm being judged. I feel like my options are being limited and the like. And so I'm just going to leave this group and ally myself with a different group instead. So you don't have to. And by the way, I mean, you're presumably just leaving one group of God's people and allying yourself with a different group of God's people. People change congregations all the time and churches all the time. So
Except on these surveys, this was explicitly people who had not done that.
well,
They left church and had stayed away.
some do, some don't, right?
Well, in this survey,
Yeah, in this survey, right? They had left. I mean, that is an option.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I do think that bearing with has to work both ways. But when you have a community where maybe some of the younger people don't feel like they have the same degree of ownership and the same degree of influence as the people who are settled and have been there for 30, 40, 50 years, there is, I think, a greater responsibility on the part of the folks who have been there to create that community where bearing with is possible by demonstrating how this works. And again, I'm not saying we never do that, don't do that. I'm just throwing out here that one of the things that Paul seems to care about and that seems to be emphasized in Scripture is that this depth that is missing in the experience of some of these young adults and teenagers comes from these relationships, should come from these relationships in which there is mutual love and there's care and there's respect.
Patrick,
Yes.
I had two comments based on things you mentioned. One was you said that you don't see much bearing with one another out, that's something that kind of everywhere we need to, or at least I think that's what you were saying, bearing with not something we're good at just in general, church or people. I think that a lot of young adults actually are very good at that. Within their world, it doesn't necessarily extend to everyone, but I mean, they're very good at accepting differences among, by and large, we're all working on that, but things that wouldn't have been talked about amongst groups of friends now are quite, one person's gay, one person's from this religion, one person's, of that. That's kind of part of what they do to extent, which is a good thing. But the other comment was, so bearing, we may need to learn something from them in terms of bearing with each other is what I was getting to. But the other thing was, you said, now I've forgotten lost my train of thought. I have to come back to you. I had it on my head. Sorry, go on.
If you think of it, just speak of it.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. If you think of it, just speak of it.
Patrick, I also wanted to jump in here. I think the responsibility of the church, I think it starts, I think it starts with me and me seeing my church as my community. And when that's the case, then I'm intentional about being approachable in little small ways, right? Somebody comes in the church, I make sure I speak, and you don't get a brownie point for that, but I'm intentional about this approachability and that others can come to me when we're talking about young adults or whomever, that they can come to me and they feel, whether we're close or not, there's a familiarity because I've set the tone for that. I've been intentional to smile at them or to say something to them. I always say this about kids. I love to see kids, if they wear glasses or they have red hair. I always am intentional to say something to them. I go, I love you in glasses because I know kids have a problem wearing glasses. They think they don't want to do that. Or if they're redheaded and they're so different than everybody else. So to be intentional to help them feel accepted in our world when they're so different. So we take that and we put it with the church, that we want to be intentional when, I think we just had a young lady at church the other day that I saw, and I haven't seen her there again. And I was like, tag, I had to leave early to go to work that Sunday. And I wanted to say more to her. She was from the community. She just wanted to see the church. Hopefully she'll come back. But if this is my community, I guess I'm saying I want to set the tone where people can feel free to come to me. And not that I have answers, but for their comfortability. And I think if we don't have that in mind, it's not going to happen. And I know that was one of the things that I struggled with when I first started coming to Northwest. And I had to shift my mindset and say, if this is my community, if I'm wanting others to do that to me, am I being that for them? And so I'm concurring with you with what you were saying earlier. But I think if we do that, people just think we're all in our own silos and doing our own thing. And, we come and say amen, and then we go home. That's not going to draw anybody to you.
Yeah, and I think there's more to say about that, and I plan to say some more about that in a second. So I'm glad you mentioned. Let's.
Let me throw out.
Go ahead.
Let me throw out something that you mentioned about the power of love in this kind of situation. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, divorce was a big issue, right? It's still an issue. But people drew very clear lines about the divorce issue. And I'm certain that some of my relatives had very clear lines as to what was right and what was wrong. And then one of my relatives married somebody who, it turned out, was probably only marrying her to get a visa to live in the United States as events worked out. And things quickly fell apart. And at a very young age, my relative ended up getting a divorce and was having to face the issue, at 22, am I in a situation where I can never remarry again? I can never have kids. I can never have a family. And it was a bad situation. But the thing I want to point out is that my relatives, despite the fact that they had some very clear views as to what was right or wrong, and what the Bible said, they also loved this woman, this young lady. And with love, they were able to accommodate the fact that she ended up making some choices going forward that maybe prior teaching hadn't told them was right. And they developed a tolerance and an ability to deal with that kind of situation. And they weren't always going around and saying, when she ended up getting remarried, and she, by the way, has been remarried for some 25 years now, well, you're living in sin, right? That isn't going to happen because of love. And I think actually in churches now, when people come in these kinds of situations, I think that's an issue oftentimes we have bridged, and we are willing to say, okay, yeah, there's some issues there, but we want to accept you in here. And, love can extend even when you may disagree with some of the decisions people have made and the like, and you may disagree with them on certain issues.
There's really no other way to love somebody.
Exactly, right? And so it works. And then they don't feel like they're being condemned. They feel like they're being accepted. They may understand that you might have a different view on something, but it's not being held up against them all the time and the like. And maybe that's what Paul is getting at here when it talks about love being something that inspires knowledge and understanding of things, which is we don't always have to draw the line right? We don't have to enforce a line. We can let God do some of that. And we can love these people. I do think a lot of times the people are leaving because they feel like they're being disapproved of. They're told what they have come to a conclusion that they can't do. And if we could just love them, love can surmount these kinds of things. If people think they really are loved, then these other things go by the by and the like. So I'm just throwing it out there as something that Paul may have been getting to, maybe what you were getting to, as an example of how love really can work to, it's not like it resolves everything, but it allows you to get past some of those things. You don't have to compromise, but loving surely isn't compromising, right? I don't feel, sometimes I think we feel like, well, we're being false. If I love this person and accept them, somehow I'm betraying my principles. You're loving, right? Surely that's not a problem.
I think, it looks to me like Christy, I remember what she wanted to say or wants to say something else. So let me go ahead and get her in. You're okay.
An echo.
Yeah.
So along the lines of what Ron said, what he's talking about is very different from, let me sit down and tell you how you're wrong, but brother, sister, I love you. That's a whole different attitude. We want to say, but I love you, but while I'm judging you, and that's not the same thing as what Ron's talking about. But it is along the lines of what I had intended to say earlier, which is, you said something about you don't see the young people necessarily reaching out to say, how about this issue, or I'm struggling with this. They just leave or slowly fade away or whatever. I think it's because they either know or think know what our answer is going to be. And
Yeah.
it's not helpful to whatever the answer, because we do feel like we've got, that was my earlier point. We do, and it's kind of along the same lines. We do feel like we have to give, well, at the Churches of Christ, here is our view on fill in the blank, and that's not helpful. It's good that we should be able to talk about negatives and pluses. I am not saying that we shouldn't be serious about the issues, but different people land in different places. That's all.
Because the same person who says bear with one another also can be pretty harsh when there's at stake something that is anti-gospel or a kind of sinful or abusive or violent behavior that we can't be just tolerated, can't be just we're just going to be hands off on that. He certainly was able to speak out when it was necessary to speak out, and that's one of the things that I think is helpful to mention when we talk about bearing with. That doesn't mean like what you said. Here's why you're wrong. Straighten up because I love you. And it's not. Well, do whatever you like. It doesn't matter. I love you. There's a lot more to it, and it's a lot more difficult because it allows us to really know each other and know that we're accepted and know that there's a comfort level there, so that we can then talk about the things that need to be talked about and the difficult conversations that sometimes have to happen among a community of people, whether they be a family or a church or a couple. And that's not an easy thing, but that's our example in Jesus. That's the gospel. That's what we're supposed to be figuring out how to live out.
They're separate issues.
What?
They're really separate issues. That's the crux of the whole thing.
What separate issues?
First, how you're going to accept people, and then second, maybe how those people are going to work out what's right and what's wrong in their lives and how they need to change, or things that they do right that need to be celebrated. It's a separate issue. It's what we lose track of perhaps in our modern society, where it's thought that acceptance is total acceptance, or it's not there at all. I think that's a big part of this knowledge and discernment. It's not that. And accept people, and then anything needs to be worked out apart from that. Just like Paul seems to accept all these people as Christians. Still say, here's how you ought to live, here's the things that you're good at, like looking at this special. Here's some things that need to be fixed. Their acceptance as Christians by him doesn't depend on those things,
Right.
at least for the most part. I mean,
Right.
there are some extreme cases like
Right.
that.
I think though that some of the issues that we have is exactly in that intersection of accepting one another, which Paul also says we should do, right? Accepting one another while also figuring out how we navigate in a way those disagreements in a way that fits with what we're saying about acceptance. And I didn't say that very well. So we're saying, look, I accept you. And that's easy to say when I don't disagree with anything you say. When we don't have a conflict, when I hardly ever see you. It's easy to say I accept you. The harder thing is accepting each other and making sure that we know that while we walk through these kind of minefields sometimes of how we live by faith. What our walk as a Christian should look like. And the issues change at different times and different eras. But always it's that how do I, I've known Ron for, how long have I known you? 28 years? Long time, right? 27, 28 years. There's a lot Ron and I don't agree on something occasionally. But I think Alan's the same. Matt and Dan. I've known you guys a long time. There are things we don't agree on. But I think, and most of the time I feel this way, that I'm accepted, that if you don't agree with me, you at least are willing to hear me and listen to me, and we can work through what we disagree with together. But that takes knowing each other. That takes time together. It takes a while to develop that trust. And that's what I think some of these young adults who have walked away aren't feeling. They're not feeling that confidence that these things can be handled in a way that still preserves the love that we have for each other, the acceptance we have for each other. I hope I said it better that time.
No, that's the other part of the knowledge part. It's not
Yeah.
the issue.
But Patrick,
Go ahead.
I agree with you until we can't wait for 28 years though. And I love your
No, I know,
analogy
I know.
and okay.
You're right. Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we have to
Okay.
wait for 28 years.
Okay.
I'm saying that,
Because we can't,
how
it's
do we
the openness
create
allows
that?
me in the first moment that I feel safe with you, or I feel brave with you. It's that encounter initially of love, of acceptance that allows me to take another step, and I can sit with you and share anything. Because I haven't known you that long, and I feel that way.
Yeah,
with you.
well, good, I'm
That's a
glad.
great conversation.
And-
So it's
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for mentioning that. Let me clarify. I did not mean, it's just,
I know.
people have to hang around for 20 years until they feel comfortable with each other. It didn't take 28 years for me to feel that way about Ron or Dan or Alan. It just, so you're right. But yeah, so those moves, those initial relationships, those initial overtures, and sometimes, and I guess part of my point is, that's gonna have to come from the people who feel more secure.
Yeah, I just want to point out, well, maybe we don't wait 28 years, but any businessman would tell you that good management is not to go to your new employee and immediately say, oh, and by the way, you're doing these 15 things wrong. You've got to change. Right? I mean, there's a point at which you let the people who have the relationship, once the love is there, once it's manifest, and people are convinced, before you tackle certain things. Now, there may be things of such urgency that you might have to address, but we're oftentimes all gung-ho to go in and admonish, and admonishing when you don't have the relationship. I mean, you can do it, but most people would tell you you're risking really turning off that person. And I think the one thing we are seeing in this is people do have other options.
Yeah.
So, I think we have to keep that in mind.
You said something interesting there that I think is important. I think you said something like we're quick to go in and admonish. And I'm not. I don't like that. In fact, I probably, if I make a mistake, it's on the other side. I probably don't admonish when I ought to. However, having said that, one of the things I think we have to consider is that we can create an atmosphere by public words. And I think about this more and more, and I kick myself sometimes for things I've said in the past. I guess everybody who ever stands up in front of a group does that. I kick myself for things I've said in the past, and I think a lot about what's the atmosphere we're creating by saying this or that. What's being said publicly, by what's being, and examples elude me, but I mean, I think about, how easy would it be to make somebody who comes to our assembly struggling with alcoholism feel about that big, right? If we hammered on certain things in Scripture, or if we were, Scripture is not the problem. If we handled those things badly, how easy it would be to just make that person feel this big for struggling with alcoholism, or whatever the, and we never gone to them and said, but what they take away. And I wonder if that's not sometimes what's happening with some of our teenagers and young adults. They're taking away a message that, if we had considered it, that would not be the message we want to convey. But yet they're taking it away. They're walking away with a sense that we don't love them, or we wouldn't be willing to help them bear with them, and we want them to bear with us. Maybe sometimes we even unintentionally create that atmosphere just by not thinking through sometimes how we, our public message and how we convey that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's all about involvement. It's all about relating to a young person at the level that they're allowed to be related, that they're going to allow you to be related. Say something nice, be complimentary, get to know them, take them to lunch, do things that make them think that you value them. And because they have enough from their parents, parents have to say no too many times and don't do this too many times. They need people in the church who will love them and accept them for what they are temporarily right now. They're not grown-ups. We can't expect everything from them, but we can teach them as we go along. But they have to know that we love them. They have to know that we value them for their good points.
Yeah.
And we don't have to fix everything in them. It's not up to us to fix them all.
Yeah,
We can't
that's right.
fix them if we can't keep them. If we can't keep them there, we can't fix them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But I wonder if, I agree with all of that, but I wonder if sometimes young adults leave because they see a lack of conviction from us about our faith. If they see a dubious behavior that we claim that we are these people who love, but we're not. So the lack of conviction, and I've had young adults tell me that, the church is just blowing hot smoke and they just want us to believe that, but no one lives up to what scriptures say. So I think we've got to look at both ends, not just the end of being more loving, but are we who we say we are? Jesus says, anyone who claims to be in me must walk as he did. So I think that is also, and not give ourselves a pass that we are doing that, but also to reflect on that to see if that is truly what they're taking away too, that we are people who are lukewarm or we have convictions about our faith. Because I think it's ends.
Or Colette, maybe this gets back to something we talked about earlier. Maybe we just have to be a little more honest with them that we realize we don't live up to this stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
And confess
that's-
that to them so that they
That-
understand.
But I have a conviction.
Yeah, that's that level of honesty that also stops people from thinking you're just a hypocrite.
yeah,
And actually, I think that makes you vulnerable and open to
Oh,
them
yeah.
then sharing with you their struggles about
Oh, yeah.
stuff as well.
It's
Exactly.
better in the areas where we don't live up to be honest about that. And to let them know that. One of the things that I was wanting to talk about, I think that's a good transition. One of the comments or the terms that was used in the survey was church is boring. And I ask you, how in the world do we bore people with the gospel? And what you see in the Bible is that people aren't bored by it. I mean, there's some hate it, some respond well to it, but boring is not, nobody yawns, right? Nobody yawned Paul to death during his missionary journeys. So, and it's maybe maybe the problem is they're not seeing and hearing the gospel from us. And it struck me what you said, Colette, and something I was thinking about earlier too. When Jesus talks about the gospel in Mark, he says the gospel is the kingdom of God has come near, which is it's a change of allegiance, right? It's he's Lord, Caesar's not. There's a regime change, and that means a different loyalty. That means different priorities. That means different values. That means your life is different. And I have to ask myself if young adults, teenagers are not seeing that in me. They're not seeing that I have a new Lord.
And that's what I mean by conviction, for clarity. That's the conviction.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's a real challenging thing. And it's not that I'm perfect.
No.
But that I'm, Jesus isn't just sort of an addition to my life or something that I sort of do as a hobby or as a job, God forbid. Jesus is the Lord. Jesus is the one who calls the shots for me. And I'm a part of that kingdom now, and I'm not a part of any other. And whether, whatever relationship I have with the powers around me are ancillary to the fact that I serve Jesus. And I have to be real critical of myself sometimes that maybe that's not what people see. And so that's not what they think when they hear gospel. And so, they kind of look at whatever I think the gospel is and they yawn because it means nothing to me. There's no change. There's no demand. There's no, I'm remembering as I was reading through some of these surveys, one of the things that kept coming back to me. I can remember being in my early 20s, feeling like, do you remember how you feel in your early 20s?
Mm-hmm.
You can change the world, right? You know, the world is at your feet and you're going to get it right. You're going to do it right. And you're going to be a part of that. And you're going to be a part of this new thing that has never been done before. And I kind of chuckle because it's naive, perhaps, but that's what a lot of young adults and teenagers are feeling. And whatever we are selling as the gospel, sometimes for them it doesn't sound like that.
If
It's
someone is
about changing the
getting-
world. Huh? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If someone is able to say, or is saying church is boring, are somehow does this person have that? You're talking about, when you talk about the gospel, you talk about being a part of the church. This is your life. You're not coming to church once a week or twice to be entertained or amused. And somehow are these young people not getting this idea from us that this is our life that we're dealing with, and that somehow they have to look at what we're saying, what we're doing in church as not something to entertain them. That this is something you need to take in and make a part of your life. It's not like going to a movie or a concert. This is learning how to live your life as a part of something that's important.
Yeah.
And-
I think we don't appropriate that to cults like we should. In some sense, we are a cult. We don't have a golden founder that we owe all of our allegiance to, but the way we're connected to Jesus is absolutely like cults attach themselves to human leaders.
Matt says maybe we need to embrace the radical, and maybe, I mean, I think there's some truth to that. I was thinking of, I took I don't think you were in the teen class. I think Vicki was in the teen class when we went through this book, and now I've forgotten the title and the author. But anyway, what's that?
Jesus Freaks, was everyone reading that?
It wasn't Jesus Freaks. It was Shane Claiborne. It was a book by Shane Claiborne. I think it was called Radical or something like that. And he was talking about he was part of this community that went into a tough area of Philadelphia, a rundown area of Philadelphia, and they just moved in and created this community of faith in the middle of this rundown neighborhood in Philadelphia. And the book has stories about their experiences and what they did. And I mean, it's something, and it's certainly not boring. It's certainly not something where somebody goes, oh, you may disagree with it, you might not like something about it, but I mean, it's that what they were trying to do is embody the gospel, embody Jesus in that community, and man, it makes you go, it makes you lift your eyebrows and go, maybe the folks who are coming down on us for being boring are onto something sometimes, because we are too safe, and we do play it too safe sometimes, and we do try not to offend people, and we do try to sort of be conservative about things in general, and
Yeah, because we may be afraid of alienating people that are on the other side of the spectrum and
Yeah.
we're less problem. But that's where what I said before is key, separating acceptance of people from
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
We all have to do that.
and not every community of faith that's, I don't mean every community of faith that's full of life and vibrant has to do just exactly what they did. But it just got me thinking about, about some of this. And I started thinking about some of this because of this survey.
Well, Patrick,
Yeah.
there was, this isn't a Church of Christ person, but someone who told the story I read where she, as a girl, was going to a church where they would stand out and tell try to save everyone by telling them they were going to hell and so forth. And she had a really good community within the church. She loved the people, but she told one of the women, I need 100 more Bibles because there are people in my school who don't come to church with us, and I don't want them, dying in a fiery hell. And she was earnest about it. And the lady gave her a sweet smile and said something like, "Oh dear, you don't need 100 Bibles." And she said it was life-changing because at that moment she realized the other lady, the adult, didn't believe it either, or didn't really want everybody to avoid the fiery hells, one or the other. Now, we're not doing that. I'm not saying that, but the reason I brought it up was what you were saying. If you're saying the young people may have an idea of how we can do more gospel messaging, maybe we stop and at least say, tell me what you think.
Yeah.
Not turn around and list the rules again. I don't know, but
Yeah, the writer of Hebrews talks about, you're not, you need milk, you're not ready for meat. And there's a time for that, right? There's a time for milk and not meat. But I think for a lot of these young adults, what they're hearing from us and seeing from us is it's almost dumbing down the gospel to them. It's get baptized, come to church, give, don't commit the big sins. There you go.
Yeah,
Done.
Patrick, one thing here. Let's give ourselves a little bit of credit here. I have remarked from time to time, I try to put songs with the message. And I remarked actually when we got Dan in before you, or Dan Alexander, that was Dan, right? It was Dan. That when he came in and putting songs with the worship all of a sudden seemed to work. And I realized it was because he was preaching the gospel. And so songs just naturally flowed together. And when somebody's not preaching the gospel, the songs don't flow. I never really had a problem putting, a few times your topics have been a little bit obtuse and I haven't been able to match up really well. I generally don't think you're not preaching the gospel. I think you are doing a good job of that. And also, I don't think people are going to be, I think in general, we like the church in general, we are moving with the times. I mean, just look at the music. We're not singing German hymns from the 1700s all the time, right? The church and the churches of Christ have progressed. We had Stamps Baxter when gospel started. We are using contemporary worship songs in our worship service now. We are using PowerPoint. We are using video on occasion. We're doing Zoom classes and the like. So that criticism may be out there for some churches, but I think we can give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back in that we have not been completely hidebound. So maybe that bit of criticism isn't as much directed to us as it might be to some other churches of Christ But
I think one of the things, and you're right, one of the things that I think is striking about this survey is the kind of music and the way worship looks doesn't seem to be the driving thing. Churches, I mean, it seems like every other church now has, cool worship at some time. and yet people are still walking. And I think maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, cool worship kept people. I don't think it does anymore. And there's got to be more than that. But I mean, your point's well taken. I think we're trying in some areas, and the things I'm saying, I hate doing this class, this subject, because it feels like a gripe session. I told Ron and I were emailing back and forth today. I said, it seems like it's a gripe session all the time. And I don't want that. I don't want it to feel like it's hopeless. The point of all of this is let's listen and let's, then try to respond and try to think about how we could. This is a good representative group of our congregation here. Let's think about how do we respond to these things in a positive way. Community keeps coming up to me again and again. Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered together, I'm there with them. So, people are saying, I'm not feeling God, I'm not feeling his presence, but it's in community. And Jesus in that text in Matthew talks about how difficult that can be, that community, how hard that can be and how much work that takes. But it's in that community where these things happen. We got to stop. So I'm going to stop it there and we'll pick up next week. If you've got other things to say, write them down. and we'll pick up with them next week. But I'm trying to get done on time as much as possible. So we'll stop for tonight. I thank you so much for all your comments. I said I hate doing this class. That's no reflection on you. It's a reflection on the subject matter. I enjoy your comments. I enjoy the things you say. I enjoy working through some of these things together. And I'm grateful for all of you and for what you mean to me and for the community that we have because of your love for the Lord.
Thank you all for your lessons.
Night.